Hello, Doug.
Hello, how's it going?
Morning,
Yeah,
Doug.
going well.
All right, so I heard Simon in there, I heard David. How are you there?
Hey.
Hello, and Tommy? Yo.
Hey, Doug. There's also an update on our website. John Ski from Google is replacing Lou as a secondary.
Oh, wait a minute. John? I always thought John was from Microsoft.
No.
I am so confused. So hold on a minute. Maybe I have him in the wrong spot then. Hold on. Let me see what I have him in the spreadsheet as.
John Ski?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know why I thought it was Microsoft. Okay, hold on a minute. My machine is going so slowly today. I have him as Microsoft. I apologize for that offense.
No worries.
All right. Okay. When my machine decides to start being normal again, I'll move them. Okay. And I'll fix it so that. Yeah. Okay.
I see where the confusion is because John is working on C#. That's probably why I saw he's from Microsoft.
That's probably what it is. Yes. Thank you.
I've only jumped into this just now. No, I've never worked for Microsoft.
Yeah, for some reason, I just assumed you and Clemens were best buds or something. I don't know why. Yeah.
You're not the first person to assume that I've at least at some point worked for Microsoft, but no.
All right. Ginger, hello.
Hey, Doug.
Jesse?
Good morning.
Good morning. Hey, Mark.
Hey, Doug.
And Christoph. Whoops. Christoph, you there?
Hi.
Hello. All right. So since we're on recording, congratulations to Remy. I think he just recently had a baby. So hopefully he's not going to be on the call, but he will hear this later if he watches or if he listens to the recording. Hey, Scott.
Morning, Doug.
And Klaus.
Hey, Doug.
Hello. Hey, while we're waiting, does anybody happen to know when you show a Google page thing or whatever it's called, is it possible to hide this thing on the left-hand side? Does anybody know that?
Well, you can present it.
Yeah, but then I have to share my whole screen, and that's going to mess everything up. I like just sharing just the window.
You can push present right now.
Instead.
If I press present right now, what do you guys see?
The full thing.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
That is awesome. Never mind then. Oh, you guys are so smart. Okay. That is cool. Thank you. Lucas, are you there?
Hi, I'm here.
Hello. And Christian?
Hey, good morning.
Morning. Daniel.
Hello.
Hello. Thought I saw somebody else go flying by. Guess not. Okay. Just one more minute, then we get started. Hey, Manuel.
Hi.
All right, let's go and get started. Whoops. All right. Clemens says all the AIs. Anything from the community anybody want to bring up? Okay, we have an SDK call scheduled after this one, but let's just double check. I don't believe there's anything on the agenda yet. So if you have any topics you'd like to bring up, add them before the end of the call. Otherwise, we will cancel that call. Nothing from interop from call last week. Nothing from KubeCon that I can think of, other than I did submit something for the CE session. Since no one volunteered to present, I decided I might as well go ahead and do it. I felt weird us not having anything at all, so I decided, to go ahead and do that. I did give the serverless working group time slot to the workflow folks because apparently sandbox projects don't get a time slot. So since he's under serverless, I decided to give it to him, and Timur is going to do a presentation there about workflow. Just everybody knows that. I don't see Timur on the call, so no update from them. I can't remember who it was. I think it might have been Tom opened up an issue yesterday saying, hey, why don't we use GitHub discussions instead of opening up or having people open up issues just to ask questions. So I enabled discussions. Hopefully everybody's okay with that. And there is one issue out there as of right now, or one discussion topic. If anybody wants to take a look at it, we can look at it offline. But just to let you guys know, I did open up discussions, so keep an eye out for those things. I think there may be a way to manage your subscriptions so you get emails about each one or something like that. I don't know much about it, but take a look if you get a chance. Okay. Before we jump into issues and PRs, are there any other topics we want to bring up to add to the agenda? All right. Now, oh, I don't see Eric. Darn it. Okay. Where is it? Guess I didn't open it up. Hold on. So Eric did open up. Okay. Eric did open up PR with a whole bunch of changes relative to the discovery spec, I believe. Let me just double check. Yeah. Please take a look when you get a chance. It's kind of large. To be honest, I have not had a chance to look at it myself, so I don't know whether it's a major set of semantic changes or they're all just syntactical type of things. But since it was just opened Tuesday and it's rather large, I figured people probably need more time, so I'm not going to push for any kind of vote or anything like that. But did anybody get a chance to take a look at it they want to comment on right now? If not, we'll just keep moving forward. Okay. I didn't think anybody had a chance to look at it yet, so please do when you get a chance because it's kind of big. And if we can get that in sooner rather than later, I think that'd be good, assuming it's headed in the right direction. Now, this issue got a whole bunch of activity recently, even though it's a really old issue. It's back from 2020. Klaus, I think you've been involved in this discussion, and at least in the recent thing of it. Is there anything you want to bring up here to make the group aware of, or is it just take time to read the issue?
Okay, so for quite some time during that discussion, I had the feeling that it's just some unclarity and things that just need a better explanation. But it turns out, I think they really stepped into something that is not so clean regarding the JSON format, I would say. So assuming you get an event in JSON format, and it is some content type, data content type, that is based on JSON. It's not application JSON directly, but maybe some of those plus JSON content types. And in which case would you assume that the whole thing under data is the JSON value is just forwarded as such, or is it a string containing JSON? So I did some, this is really confusing, and I also, it took me quite some time to read into it, and then I did some research in the source code of the Go SDK at least, and there I found some place where there is checked if it is text/JSON or application JSON, and in those cases, the whole part on the right-hand side here of data content type, so including the colons, the quotes, is taken as a value. So if you forward this as a binary message, And you need to include in case it is JSON, you need to include this quote, because otherwise it's not a valid JSON value anymore. But for other cases, you would remove the quotes because the string, the content of the string is the data content. So that's quite confusing. But it turns out that you need to know for which content types the SDK on the other side, on the sending side, did some escaping, and in which case it didn't. So as I found out for the Go SDK, it seems to be text JSON and application JSON. But for example, as far as I saw, it doesn't do it for, it doesn't assume this for some plus JSON formats. So I didn't try it out, but I don't know what other SDKs do, if they have the same rule, if they just look at text JSON and application JSON, but it's not clearly specified. So
there's a provision to add other media type support.
Okay.
So you could technically enable any other media type.
Yeah, sure, you could.
You add that piece to the SDK.
Well, so Klaus, it sounds to me like this. Well, it sounds to me like you guys maybe have not come to a resolution yet as part of the discussion. Otherwise, you probably would have said so. So so it sounds to me like maybe people need to take the time to read this, and maybe we can bring it up on next week's phone call to get into a deeper dive discussion on it.
So we had some conclusion. I was looking at other formats, and for protobuf, you have a clear distinction. If it's protobuf, if it's string or text, and binary. So those three are clearly distinguished. In JSON, you only distinguish data and database 64, while I think it would be cleaner to distinguish JSON, text, and base 64. Otherwise, all SDKs have to follow the exact same rule, which media types are assumed to be JSON and which aren't. So that's.
So do you think other people agree with you to the point where you want to create a PR
I don't know,
for this, or?
Would be, I don't think we can change this. I mean, it would be a breaking change. So that's where didn't really reach a conclusion. So what I wrote today, at least my today, is the conclusion I reached so far. I would be interested to hear, especially from the SDK maintainers, how they would handle this.
Yeah, I've given a bit of a flavor of what we do in C#, but I haven't checked. I think we only deal with application JSON, only treat that as JSON, or possibly we do it the other way around and it's text/anything, and it if it's a string and it's text/JSON, sorry, text/anything, then we say, okay, you meant it to be a string. If it's either not text/ or it's the value isn't a string, so it's a JSON object or whatever, we assume that you meant it to be a JSON object. The fact that it's not well specified is definitely a source of confusion. I think your proposal for data_text would be absolutely fine if we were pre 1.0. Whether we want to do that for 2.0 or not, I think it's worth at least, I don't know whether we have a milestone 2.0 consider thing for stuff that we might want to put into 2.0. But yeah, possibly the next step would be gather together information about what all the SDKs do, and then see whether we can change all of them to be consistent without breaking any of them, which could also be difficult.
Okay. What I'd like to recommend, though, is, because I doubt most people on the call have actually had time to read through the issue to fully digest it. Is it okay if we defer this discussion until next week, and that way people have a week to scan through this and get their heads around it? Okay.
And I guess if SDK maintainers could each take an action to write a fuller than I did for C# earlier in the thread description of what their SDK does, that would probably be useful for everyone.
Yep. Just taking some notes here for the minutes. Okay, so let's do that. Thank you, Klaus, for taking the lead on presenting that to us. So, okay, we'll discuss this next week. And SDK folks, please come with info on what you guys did on your various SDKs. Okay. Now, Eric, I noticed you slipped in there. I mentioned your PR. I mentioned that we weren't going to obviously vote on it today because it's large and most people haven't had a chance to review it. But is there anything you'd like to mention in here? For example, is it simply syntactical changes, or are there real semantic changes that you were trying to fix? Just a high-level overview of what you were trying to accomplish here.
Sure. So the kind of background is that I was looking at how to add history to the Discovery API, or allow for that to be offered. And I started digging in. I added some text. I was going to modify the OpenAPI spec, and found that it wasn't synchronized with the specification at all. And so I started going through the specification to try and synchronize the OpenAPI spec. And then I found that there were often disagreements in the text. For example, there was a body shown that was described in one way, but as this object, but then didn't have the object practices, silly things mostly, but some of them kind of significant. And then I, while I was going through kind of that arc of things, I started editorializing a bit. And you know, for example, the use of that import flag, it seemed is kind of changing it into more of an RPC than something like a collection filter. And so I expressed some opinions on top of that. And I tried to maintain the existing kind of notions as much as possible, but probably the biggest thing that I did is that I tried to consolidate the differential treatment between kind of the import and the lack of import. So I've tried to be far more clear about what the behavior is, and I think it should take care of the main use cases. Anyway, that's kind of the overview.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Any questions or comments for Eric? Okay, so just a reminder, please look that over during the week, and maybe we can try to resolve it next week if there are no large issues with it. Cleanup is always good. So thank you, Eric, for doing that. I appreciate it. But what's next? Oh yeah, so I found a couple more issues that I thought we possibly could close. Thank you to the folks who reviewed the previous list from last week. I think of the 5 that I mentioned last week, I think I closed 4 of them. One of them, I think, John, you mentioned might be good to keep open, so I kept that one up. But the other 4, I think I did close. I did add 4 more to the list for this week, so please look at these when you get a chance and let me know whether anybody thinks they should stay open. Any reason whatsoever to keep it open, and I'll keep it open. But if no one speaks up, I will probably close them. So please just take a look when you get a chance. Just trying to clean up the backlog. All right, John.
Yep, this is brief.
Okay, good.
Basically, having deferred for weeks and weeks and weeks, making any kind of proposal for how we move forward in terms of versioning specifications and how we deal with things on GitHub, I have made a reasonably significant start. I don't expect anyone to have read this at all yet, but if folks could try to read it before next week, or possibly in 2 weeks' time. I know my movements next Thursday are slightly tricky. I think I'll be around for most of the meeting though. Yeah, dump a load of comments in the doc, basically.
Okay. Anybody want to raise any questions or concerns now, or just wait till next week? Okay, not hearing any. Doesn't look too long, so we should be able to find time to review that.
Hey, Doug,
Yes, Scott, please.
could
go ahead.
you please send an email after this with a reading list? Because I think there's like, this is the third or fourth thing that we're like supposed to read.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let me make an AI for myself. With homework. Okay. Can do. Yep. Okay. Any other or any comments, questions on this one? All right, cool. In that case, thank you, John, for taking the AI to write that up. All right. I don't think there's anything to comment on any of these things. I know Slinky is really eager to get this one closed, but we're waiting on Clemens. So unfortunately, well, Slinky's not on the call, but if he does watch the recording, Clemens is out for 2 weeks, so that's not going to happen anytime soon. Before I get into the presentation on the pagination stuff, for those of you who do not know, unfortunately, Slinky is moving on to other adventures, and so he may not be able to continue his work with the cloud events stuff. He did reach out to me either yesterday or the day before, and I think he found somebody to pick up his work on some of the SDK stuff, so that's good. But we don't have anybody to sort of take ownership of the SQL expression language. So if you are interested in that, please let me know. Granted, I mean, obviously there's nothing you need to do other than it just would be nice to know who we can sort of lean on to sort of own that going forward, or to take the lead on it at least. I know there's at least one person in the Knative world who may be interested, so I was going to try to reach out to them. But otherwise, we are looking for sort of a new lead of that one if you're interested. And that would also probably include presentation to the group on the spec itself at a future date. Okay. Actually, since we have a little bit of time, Scott, can you think of anybody from Knative might be interested? I was actually thinking of either Ahmed or Lionel might be interested in that, but I'm not 100% sure. Do you know of somebody else that might be?
Well, Ahmed's not really a coder.
No, but I thought he was interested in the spec for some reason. Maybe I'm mistaken though.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe Lionel, but Lionel hasn't been involved in any of the SDK work.
Okay. Okay. Well, if you can think of anybody, let me know. Okay. All right. In that case, let's jump over to the pagination stuff and we'll do the big thing. All right. So my homework was to briefly summarize the pagination spec. It's actually fairly straightforward. Where is it? Okay. So basically, as you might expect, it's all about defining a mechanism by which a client can specify that they don't want to necessarily get back all of the data related to a query. In other words, they are worried about the data set being returned or being too large. They want to be able to specify, hey, I only want to get maybe 100 records coming back. Okay, and it's specifically based on the number of records, not on the size of the payload itself. So obviously, they need to think about that in advance. If they can. If they don't know the payload size, then they're basically out of luck relative to the specification. So for the client, they should be able to specify the size of the payload they want to get back in terms of number of records, and then they need a mechanism by which they can discover how to get the next set of data coming back. And whether that next set is either forwards or backwards is up to the server to decide. But obviously, the point here is they want to do slow iterations over a large data set. Hold on a sec. Okay, so then from the server side, they obviously want to be able to return chunks of data back, hopefully paying attention to what the client asked for in terms of number of records. But then the server needs to have a standardized mechanism by which they could say, yes, here's the current chunk, but here's some other chunks you might be interested in, previous, next, first, last, that kind of stuff. And how do they specify that in a standardized way? So that's what the spec is trying to do. Now, the spec didn't actually really invent anything new. All it did is use stuff that I found out there. There are lots of different ways this can be done. I chose one. If people don't like it, I'm not married to it. We can change it. There are a couple of things that were sort of guiding principles for me. One was I decided, at least in the HTTP case, not to modify the data itself. because there were some implementations of pagination that decided to try to include things like this link information inside the body of the actual data itself. So basically they kind of created another wrapper around the data so they could have these links. And I heard from enough people in the past that they said that was just more pain than it was worth. So I thought, okay, from their recommendation, it seemed logical then to maybe treat this as HTTP headers. And then once I went down that path, I found some examples out there that seemed relatively straightforward to me. I found a couple of RFCs that talked about how to do this stuff, and I basically followed those patterns. So I didn't really invent anything new, just picked one that said, let's use this going forward as our standard, okay? So here's a very simple example of what it might look like. A user just does a get and then a people. And inside this set of, in the response that comes back, there are one or more link headers. And in this particular case, it's saying, okay, there's a HTTP URL of where to get the next piece of data for this data set. So in this particular case, the only link that this thing returns is how to get the next set of data. And that's all there is to it. So this is the most simple use case that I could possibly think of. Okay, so let's talk, before I talk about more advanced use cases, let's talk a little bit about what data might appear in both the request and the response. Oh, and obviously, if you guys have any questions, chime in, don't wait for the end. Okay, so from the client's perspective.
So I have a question, Doug.
Yeah, please.
If you go back one slide, how do you know which list you're talking about? Because the lists in the backing server could change, and there's no reference to which version of the list we're offsetting by.
Right. So let me talk about that in a second. Okay. And I think on the next couple of slides, I do address that. So let's hold off on that one just for a minute, if that's okay. Okay. So let's first talk about what the client can send. And on the initial request, the only thing the client can send is a limit flag. And that basically says the maximum number of records they're willing to accept. Okay. Again, there's no mention of record size. And so it has nothing to do with the total payload size. It's strictly number of records. Okay. They are only allowed to include this on the initial request. Okay. If they want to change the number of records halfway through a series of gets, they can't, or at least they're not supposed to. Okay. It's only, this makes it so that it's really easy for the server to do their processing, right? So for example, maybe they need to return things in terms of, like chunk number as opposed to beginning and ending record number kind of stuff, right? And in order for them to be able to have that flexibility of saying, I want to return chunk number 5, they need to know what the chunk size is up front, and it's not going to change over time, right? So to give the server, or to make the life easier on the server, I decided you can only specify this on the initial request. Now, that's not to say that the server couldn't include a limit on his responses that they're returned, but that's up to the server to decide. The client cannot add additional query parameters later. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Okay, and
it's worth noting that that introduces a limitation if. So having done the same thing for Google's APIs and in particular worked on the client libraries for it, if you're trying to present a UI in terms of 10 items at a time, for example, and so you say, I would like 10 items, please. And the server said, okay, well, you told me I had 10 seconds to do this, and I've only found 5, but here's a link that will let you get more. There may or may not be some more. I would want to say, okay, I will ask for the next 5 so that then I've got a page of 10 that I can give to the actual user. Even though I'm sort of trying to paginate in 10, I want to make sure I've always got what we in Google talk about as page tokens for the 10. Now, if the server can guarantees that it will always fill a chunk, fulfill the limit, unless it's reached the end, then that's not a problem. But if it's like a sort of stream.read in at least most platforms that I've seen where there's no guarantee that it'll fill it, even if there's more data to come, that does present client-side issues.
Interesting. That's a really cool use case. Okay, thank you. I'll have to think about that.
And I've put a link to the Google API design docs into the chat. I can certainly speak to any comparisons and things. I know it fairly well.
Cool. Okay. No, that's a cool use case. Yep. And I think it's a good one we should take into account. Thank you. Okay. So the server response. I'm talking about the actual properties themselves or fields. And I'll talk a minute about how they obviously can appear in HTTP case. I do have in this, or we do have in the spec an HTTP binding that shows how these things appear in HTTP, but obviously other protocols will have different bindings, right? So there can be one or more links, which is, as we talked about in this simple example, a URI that references a related set of data. And you could have multiple links in there, as I said, but each one has to have a unique rel value. Okay, so you, for example, can only have one next link in there. Okay, each link has to have a rel, which has to have a value of something like next, previous, first, or last. Okay, and I think there is an RFC out there that defines the set that I chose, that I picked these from. And then there can optionally be an expires value in the message that gets returned, so that the client knows how quickly they need to sort of finish their iteration over the data sets, because after this time, the data set will probably no longer be valid. Okay. Now, I don't actually, I guess I don't have an explicit statement here, but Scott, I think what I want to do is talk about your question in here, which is, how does the user know which data set they're iterating over? Was your question more from a client perspective or a server perspective?
Yeah, I think it's mostly kind of the communication between the client and the server. And I think that link will have some sort of the pagination token or session ID, or, like some sort of key to tell you which version of the list is valid for some amount of time, because the server will have to cache that. And then you put the TTL on the link, and the order is no longer valid after some amount of time, because we won't cache it.
Exactly, yes. And that's what the second bullet was trying to talk about, which is the entire URL that gets returned here is supposed to be just an opaque string to the client, right? This is part of the reason why over here we talk about the limit is only supposed to be specified on the initial request, because the idea of the client mucking with this URL that gets returned, is kind of scary, because as you said, there may be lots of other things in there that the client may not even understand, right? Obviously, if they see things like chunk size in there, chunk number, those kind of things, they may be able to make guesses about. But if there's some sort of token, as you're kind of talking about there, Scott, that indicates, which actual list or which query data set behind the scenes is actually being iterated over, you don't want the user mucking with those and possibly screwing it up, right? So that's why the spec explicitly talks about the URL and all of its values in there being completely server defined and opaque to the client, and they should not muck with it in any way whatsoever. Now, obviously, that use case that John mentioned may throw that into a up for grabs kind of discussion thing. But we'll have to see how that plays out. Okay.
Interestingly, so while in the Google design, yes, you can specify a different maximum page size, as we call it, each time, but the page token is indeed meant to be opaque, and we strongly recommend that it is that it contains some kind of cryptographic hash that the server can validate, and that it is quite clearly opaque, because if, as you've got on the next slide, you've got limit and offset, people will just mess around with that and think, I know how to get, even if they're only given next, they'll say, I know how to get to page 100, I shall just tweak things. Yep. And that means you're forever tied to that, even if you're meant to have complete latitude to start giving a different algorithm for pagination. Yep. Yeah, we try to make it as opaque as possible.
Yep, and that's something if I remember correctly, I think I did think about stuff like that, and at one point in time, I think I actually wrote down a little more. What's the word I'm looking for? I tried to be a little more prescriptive about it and said, "Oh yeah, there's going to be a token thing," and I realized I didn't want to get into that business. I didn't want to tell a server how to do their job, because maybe somebody actually does want this kind of flexibility. I don't know, but I didn't think it was our job to necessarily prevent them from doing it. But I do expect most people will do kind of what you said there, John. Try to make everything opaque and hide as much of the details to give them the most freedom to change things under the covers without messing the user up.
I think experienced folks might. I think it may be worth having some kind of warning saying, if you make anything have obvious meaning, you should document that meaning and be prepared to stick with it forever. Otherwise, try to hide your implementation. It's a sort of design for inheritance or prohibit it kind of thing.
Yep.
Be deliberate about it.
Yep, that makes sense.
Just as a recommendation, not as a requirement. You can't require that kind of thing.
Yep, agreed. Yep. So here's a little more complete example, right? Still basing it on the limit thingy, but here you see some other types of links that might get returned, right? So it's not just the next one we saw on the previous slides, but also maybe they wanted to include links to the first and last in the entire list. If they want to allow people to jump, to the end and beginning of the list very quickly. And as I said, I did try to base it on existing RFCs that I found because I didn't feel like I needed to necessarily reinvent the wheel here. So that was about it. Now, as I was going through there are a couple of things I'd noticed that I thought were sort of holes in the spec. Obviously, the spec is still very much in draft form. And so these are some of the things I found as I was going through it that I wanted sort of open PRs on to fix. But that's about it. And as I said, it's a fairly easy spec. I'm not, as I said, married to any of it. I'm open to any kind of changes. If John, if you guys think the stuff you guys did at Google is worthy of us looking at, then I'm okay with changing it. If people think that's a better way to go, I'm open to anything on this. The only thing that I personally would like to do is try to keep it as simple as possible and as open as possible so that servers feel like they can do what they need to do and not feel constrained into one particular format, right? By, say, for example, requiring a particular token or, whatever. Okay. Any questions, comments?
Just, I completely understand the not wanting to be too prescriptive, but just like with the opacity thing, it may well be worth mentioning caveats around, if you include an offset, then think about what happens if something you've already returned gets deleted or inserted earlier in the list before the next request. It's really nice to be able to guarantee to the client, if you just keep paginating next, you will never see the same thing twice, and you will never skip over things unless you had already gone past them. That sort of thing, where if you return something that includes some sort of database cursor effectively, then yes, if you've already gone past the A's and B's, when someone adds abacus, then you won't see that, but you won't get to the stage where just because something entirely random was inserted or deleted, you end up with a completely different item being removed or not returned, rather.
Yeah, I might be remembering incorrectly, but I have this very strong feeling that in the spec itself, I specifically said whether these cursors are safe or not, right? To handle the case of somebody inserting or deleting stuff. I think I said that's an implementation choice, but I'll go back and double check.
I'm happy to take an AI to review all of this really carefully.
Yeah, because I don't know whether we at a generic spec level can ever mandate one or the other. And that's why
I guess we're not mandating a spec here. We're suggesting a pattern.
Yeah, no, I agree. So yeah, so if we have a primer for this stuff, then I agree with everything you're saying there. I was just thinking from a normative perspective. I didn't think we could be too prescriptive. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay. So that's the idea behind the spec. Obviously, now people are free to open up issues, PRs, whatnot. But I tried to keep it as simple as possible. Actually, that seems kind of small. There we go. Okay. That was actually, was this the same issue we already talked about? Yeah, we already talked about this one, so we don't need to do it again. Okay. So that's it in terms of the agenda for today. Were there any other topics people wanted to bring up? Okay.
This whole presentation thing seems to be working well. I like it. I hope it's as useful for everyone else.
Yeah, well, I think it's great for reminders of what we actually put down on paper. But then, at least from my perspective, yeah, it forced me to go back and reread this stuff and find holes, which is always good. Okay. Any other topics? Unfortunately, with Clemens is out for, I think, at least one more week, so we're not going to get his thing. And like I said, I'll try to find somebody to talk about the SQL stuff. But other than that, I'm not hearing anybody jump up and down on the topic. So Lance, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
All right. Did I miss anybody for attendance? Okay. Any topics you want to bring up for the discovery? I'm sorry, not discovery, for the SDK call. Otherwise, we'll cancel that one. All right, cool. In that case, we are done. And hold on a second. Let me copy John's link. Otherwise, I will forget that. Hold on. Can't type. Okay, in that case, whoa, that is not right. Okay, thank you, John, for that link. All right, in that case, we are done. Thank you all for joining. We'll talk again next week. Have a good day.
You too. See you.
Hey, folks.
Bye, everybody.